Now there's a lot of obscure stuff regarding the wildlife in Sonic games. They kinda go undiscussed and undocumented despite the fact that they give the more minimalistic games a lot of life and are pretty much the peak of oddly specific interests you can have regarding Sonic. While there are plenty of things I could discuss, like the unnamed animals not from Sonic 1 and 2, I want to delve into the more obscure mysteries that essentially no one discusses. In the 8-bit version of Sonic 2, if you head to the very top left corner of Sky High Zone, you'll find this 1-up. If you jump over the 1-up and walk into the left side of it, these yellow birds will suddenly appear, and you can keep triggering this forever. This is a very odd Easter egg with seemingly no purpose, and this is the only time these birds appear in the game. But I think I figured out the meaning behind it. See, this is actually a reference to the Japanese folktale Damasare Yasui Kankyak about a man who walked into his own life and birds came out. Okay, jokes aside, I genuinely don't know why this exists. My theory is that these bird sprites were created for whatever reason, scrapped, and the programmers hid them as an Easter egg, and this Easter egg may be a very obscure reference to something. For now, we don't have an answer though. There is one more wildlife related mystery I want to talk about though, and that's one of the animals from Sonic 2, this little mouse who only appears in Mystic Cave. What sets it apart is that, unlike the other animals from Sonic 2, for the longest time it was unnamed. In fact, artwork of the character wouldn't even be found and could be assumed to not exist until it was found in an old issue of Japanese magazine Mega World in 2022. With the release of Sonic Mania in 2017, where it appears in Studiopolis, it was finally given the name Mickey, which seems to be a pretty obvious reference that I don't need to explain. However, it's unknown if the character was originally given this name or a name at all. Sonic Eraser is a game best known for its awful music, though I will always stand by the belief that it's not that bad if you just take out the arrhythmic clanking. This music was actually composed by Masaru Setsumaru, credited as Bossa Nova Ois, who after this game's release would go on to work on Sonic 3 and Knuckles and Sonic Jam, so this definitely wasn't the work of some untalented hack. I don't know what happened here, but this was seemingly his first work for Sega. Outside of its music, there really isn't a lot to know about Sonic Eraser other than that it's a pretty generic matching puzzle game that's only connected to Sonic by his inclusion, seemingly fighting a reflection of himself. This game was released exclusively on Sega's Sega Game Toshokan downloadable game service that could be accessed through the Mega Modem, a Mega Drive add-on that allowed players to connect to the internet. This game would have possibly been unknown and could have become lost media if Sega didn't re-release it in 2004 as part of a service where people could buy and download Mega Drive games. And this was the only time Sega re-released it. Yep, make the comment. The mystery here comes in because of the game's very nature. As a downloadable game from the early 90s, it has no known release date. The ROM header says October of 1989, but this seems to be the default for all Sega Game Toshokan games, while the title screen merely says 1991. This could place it in any time of said year, and because of that, possibly make it the first Sonic game ever released, predating Sonic 1's release in June of 1991, though it wouldn't predate his cameo appearance in the Sega arcade game Radmobile in 1990, which, fun fact, is how I first learned what the word cameo meant as a kid. It's very possible that this was the first Sonic game released, and that's interesting to think about. Maybe one day Sega will provide information on the release dates of these Sega Game Toshokan games, and we'll know for sure whether or not that would be the case. This is a bit of a sillier entry. At the end of Sonic 2, Sonic's plane, the Tornado, and Tails along with it, gets shot down by lasers that come out of literally nowhere. and Sonic abandons Tails to take Dr. Eggman down in his wing fortress. Terrible friend. After that though, Eggman escapes on a rocket. As he flies off, Tails miraculously comes back, having added a rocket to the tornado off screen that allows it to ascend, even though it could before. Maybe it was meant for really high air travel, I don't know. However, in both endings, this rocket doesn't appear, not even in the ending illustrations. By the way, I rarely hear anyone talk about those. I've always wanted to see the original sketches for those pictures. Anyways, whenever the tornado reappeared in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the rocket is always attached to it, even though it's never used for the same apparent use it had in Sonic 2. However, while it appears in Sonic 3, it doesn't appear in the original tornado's appearances in Sonic CD, Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic 4 Episode 2. Meanwhile, the redesigned version with Tails' Tails icons all over it that debuts in Sonic Adventure has smaller boosters on it instead, which can be excused as its own upgrade made later. However, the tornado was redesigned to once again have its original design in Sonic Lost World and Sonic Frontiers. While this can be excused by saying it's supposed to be a different model, it's heavily implied to still be the original, with no reason given why it looks different from the one from Sonic Adventure. Meanwhile, its appearances in Chaotix and Sonic Mania do feature the rocket. In fact, the unused sprite of it in Chaotix also features it. There's not really a mystery looking to be answered here. These mistakes can basically be chalked up to whoever designed the tornado for a certain game not being aware of these details or being told to make it look a certain way. But it's still kind of a mystery nonetheless. I don't think this stuff should be taken too seriously, I just find it interesting. It doesn't get brought up nearly as much as the moon inconsistency. Okay, this is probably the dumbest entry on this iceberg, but I felt the need to talk about it anyways. South Island is the main location that Sonic 1 takes place on, and as you can imagine, is a reoccurring location throughout the series. For a long time, the website Sonic Retro claimed in its article for South Island that it was located in the Pacific Ocean, citing the Japanese Sonic 1 manual as a source for this claim. However, this is never stated in the manual, and it's unknown where the user who wrote this information actually got it from. It's a much more specific statement than just saying it's located in the ocean, which would be kind of obvious, it's an island, but if true, it would heavily imply that the Sonic games were always intended to take place on a fictionalized version of our real Earth, which would bring into question the series slowly revealing itself to take place on a fictional Earth leading up to Sonic Unleashed. This claim was up on the page for nearly 20 years and was only recently removed around the time I started to work on this video. As much as I would like to believe it because I prefer the idea of Sonic taking place in a fictionalized version of our own world rather than a fictional Earth, or, just being left up to interpretation in general, this statement kind of contradicts the statement from the manual that South Island moves throughout the sea thanks to the power of the Chaos Emeralds. Though that also seemingly directly contradicts the name South Island, but whatever. It was probably another case of whoever named the place not knowing what certain English words actually mean, like how Metropolis and Hydro City aren't cities. That detail actually leaves open the question as to if its location was stabilized once Sonic collected them all and used them at the end of Sonic 1, something that was never explained in later games it appeared in. Anyways, it would be interesting to know where this Pacific Ocean claim came from, as I can't find the original Sonic Retro user who seemingly originated it. Chaotix, better known as Knuckles Chaotix outside of Japan, was a game starring Knuckles the Echidna released for the 32X add-on for the Sega Genesis in 1995. The game is not particularly well regarded, though I do kind of find it charming and a bit of a vibe, but yeah, it's not very good. It revolves around this ring tethering gimmick, as you can play as Knuckles, newcomer Espio the Chameleon, and 3 other more obscure Sonic characters from the time. And I've said this before, but it needs to be said again, Chaotix is just a title. The characters in the context of the original game aren't a team. The story states that they were all brought together separately, with each character having their own motivations. The idea of these characters being a team wouldn't be introduced until the Sonic comics and wouldn't be in the games until Sonic Heroes. Anyways, if you know anything about Chaotix, you probably know that it originally started life as a game entitled Sonic Crackers starring Sonic and Tails for the Mega Drive. However, Sega did not want the next mainline Sonic title following Sonic 3 and Knuckles to be some weird experiment that focuses on poorly thought out gimmicks, so supposedly forced the team to use other characters instead, and moved the project to the 32X. However, the earliest version of Chaotix after the Switch seemed to go under a different title, Knuckles' Ring Star. This name can be seen in magazine screenshots, with the Spanish magazine Super Juegos containing this screenshot of a very crude early title screen for the game, and this early character select screen that has Mighty the Armadillo's name listed as Nat, seemingly implying that the developers attempted to rename him before backing off for whatever reason. While you could claim these were mock-ups, the Knuckles art that this title screen is based off of seemingly wouldn't be released to the public until the release of the compilation Sonic Jam. And other magazine screenshots show the Knuckles Ring Star name on the level intro screen. This build has never been found. Interestingly though, other early magazine screenshots show that the game was also going to be titled Chaotix featuring Espio the Chameleon at one point. It seems the developers were flip-flopping between choosing to have Knuckles or Espio be the main character, as even in one of the Knuckles Ring Star screenshots, you can see Espio's name is at the top of the character names list, and it's the same way in the final game. No version of this build has ever surfaced either. In the Japanese manual for Chaotix, it mentions that its island setting rose from the Nankai, or Southern Sea. On the Japanese Sonic website's description for Sonic R's courses, it also suspiciously leaves a detail that Regal Ruin, one of the game's many courses, is also located in the Nankai. This is a very oddly specific thing to mention. I have no clue how I first stumbled across this, but trying to research into it further led me to this fandom article about it, which is now the only thing online I can find about the connection between these two places besides the original sources. On one hand, it is kind of suspiciously odd that this strangely specific location was mentioned in 2 different places, but at the same time, it could just be a coincidence. I doubt whoever wrote the descriptions for Sonic R's courses was deliberately attempting to tie Regal Ruin to Chaotix's setting, and there's nothing else that connects them. If you haven't noticed, quite a few Sonic fans tend to overestimate the continuity of these older games. Still, what an oddly specific detail to include. If it's an offhanded comment about its location, why be so specific? This seems to be oddly similar to the whole Pacific thing too, with both involving weird things on wikis and parts of the ocean. Whether intentional or not, it's strange. Okay, this isn't that obscure in comparison to everything else, but I still need to cover it. And a lot of you probably haven't heard about this before. Tails Sky Patrol is one of the strangest games ever made. It was a game starring Tails for the Game Gear, but only in Japan for some reason, and I have no clue what genre to classify this as. The closest I can come up with is shoot 'em up. But those things are actually the least strange things about this game. This game's development is extremely mysterious, and all that's known is some information from a developer going by a pseudonym Alice Kagamino, who stated that the game originally started out life as a game developed by Japan System House for a completely mysterious cancelled handheld game system before being moved to the Game Gear and turned into a Tails game. Making this even weirder is the fact that early footage from a 1995 Sega preview VHS tape shows Tails fighting what is clearly the Disney character Pete. While this leads a lot of people to assume that the game was originally a Disney licensed game, especially with the other bosses in the game bearing resemblance to certain Disney characters, and it seems that's what the original game for the other system was, the final Tails Sky Patrol does a shockingly good job at covering this stuff up with Sonic stuff, to the point where if we didn't know this, it would be pretty hard to assume that there was a Doki Doki Panic situation going on, other than the boss characters not really fitting into Sonic and Tails' art style. It feels more aesthetically like a Sonic game than even some Sonic games. In fact, Tails even goes around collecting mint candy, an aspect based on the really obscure detail that Tails likes mint candy from the Japanese Sonic 2 manual. I'm not joking when I say this is the most thought that has ever been put into continuity for a Sonic game, even to this day. With all of this attention to detail in mind, it's weird that the manual's story section states that Tails, wanting to be independent from Sonic, wanders onto some strange, mysterious island that he's never been to before. An island that happens to house places that look exactly like Emerald Hill, Mystic Cave, and Casino Night from Sonic 2's West Side Island. You know, Tails' place of origin. It's very clear that the game does take place on West Side Island, but for whatever reason, the manual treats it like this mysterious place Tails has never been to before. What's really mysterious, though, is this game's development and the dozens of questions it raises. Mainly, the fact that it's supposedly connected to an entire cancelled system, yet it seems like it was the only game ever made for this system, is really suspicious. I promise this is the last entry about islands. It's just that one of the most consistently good things about Sonic is the settings, so I'm always interested in them. Unfortunately, in the early 2000s, it seemed that with those final pieces of the original Sonic team completely gone, the quality of the settings did take a small hit, at least the more traditional island settings. What once were well thought out and unique island settings were getting more generic overall and didn't even have names. The first game to get hit with this would be Sonic Advance, a game which I love, but also has a very poorly defined setting. The game starts out in Neo Green Hill Zone, implying it to take place on South Island where Green Hill Zone is located, but the fifth level is called Angel Island, and the two levels that precede it are clearly based on Sonic 3 zones with elements of Sonic Adventure stages sprinkled in. So it can be assumed that most of the game takes place on Angel Island, but Neo Green Hill clearly doesn't. My headcanon is that Secret Base, the second level, acts as a sort of bridge between South Island and Angel Island, somehow. However, Sonic Advance 2's situation is much worse. While there's a clearly defined world map, it seems to be a set of continents, but this directly contradicts the intro movie, which shows an island, and this location has no name given to it anywhere, and neither do the names of the settings for Sonic Heroes and the first Sonic Rush. The island that Sonic Rush takes place on is also the home of Cream the Rabbit. Related to this, there's also the question of what the large, seemingly unoccupied landmass from Sonic Adventure 2 that's widely theorized to be Angel Island is, only amplified by the fact that the rest of the locations in the game are fairly well defined. It seems now that they're moving back towards these named island locations for the series. Unfortunately, it kinda feels too little too late. I'm ungrateful, I know. The Starfall Islands from Sonic Frontiers don't even feel like Sonic Islands. It's clear to me that for the early 2000s games, they just never considered giving these locations a name or designation. Though who knows, maybe they actually did, and maybe they will in the future. Please? In this Japanese commercial for Sonic 1, supposedly from late 1991, Sonic is shown in various scenarios that aren't even from the game, most of which are movie references. One of these scenes features Sonic in a spaceship blowing up a clear Death Star reference in the shape of Dr. Eggman's face. This commercial predates the official debut of the Death Egg, which is the exact same thing, in Sonic 2 by nearly a year. It's unknown if the developers of Sonic 2 took any inspiration from this commercial and where the idea truly came from, but it's interesting nonetheless. In this Japanese commercial for Sonic 1, Sonic is shown being carried around a city by a human driver. This would make him one of the first humans to appear in the Sonic franchise. I could have sworn that I saw somewhere that this character had a name, but upon doing further research, I came up empty-handed. Was this character created solely for this commercial, or did the studio who created it use it for other projects? He doesn't really look like he was made solely for this commercial, and if he was, it feels like a high amount of effort to create a model for such a small character, and he's the only other character besides Sonic who appears in the commercial. I haven't been able to find any information on who handled the production of this commercial, so that's a real barrier to finding out the answers to these mysteries. At the end of Stardust Speedway in Sonic CD, you end up saving Amy. As soon as the stage ends and Metallic Madness starts, Amy is nowhere to be found again, and she only reappears after defeating the final boss, and Sonic is shown carrying her off Little Planet, landing back at Never Lake with her in the final cutscene. Where did she go? Stardust Speedway Act 3 only ends if she literally grabs onto and hugs Sonic, so it makes no sense that she disappeared and had her own little adventure in Metallic Madness. Why doesn't she follow you around? Why doesn't she just cling onto you? Why didn't they have Sonic carry her around? Actually, that's not a good idea. I guess the developers didn't have the time to implement a follower character that appears exclusively in a few stages, even though that would have been cool. Either that or the developers would have considered her presence a distraction to players who, mind you, would be facing the game's biggest challenges. Even if you think about the implications, it doesn't make sense, because I guess the implication is that Sonic ran away from her at the end of Stardust Speedway and Amy only catches up with him conveniently at the end, but that implies that Sonic was basically going to leave her behind to potentially get hurt, a stark contrast to how he's portrayed in the ending. So I don't think there's even an intentional implication here. They just kinda forgot, and there was zero thought put into it at all, but I could be wrong. It sucks because it actually would have been cool if they pulled a reverse Sonic 2 and instead of taking a character away from you for the last few stages, they added a new one. I don't think there's an intentional reason for this, and they just genuinely didn't want Amy to follow Sonic around at the end of the game and thought players would overlook it, but I could be wrong. There's also the fact that unlike Tails, Amy doesn't have the power to match Sonic's super speed, so I guess that makes sense. If you played Sonic 1, Sonic 2, and Sonic CD as many times as I have, you probably don't think anything of the title screens, especially not the logo that was seemingly inspired by like 4 different things at the same time, which is insane. However, looking at the text, you start to notice something weird, aside from the fact that the third E is different for some reason, something that would only be changed in Sonic CD and only when it was renamed Sonic CD. It's that these games all feature a reflection inside of the Sonic text, what appears to be a desert or the shore of a beach. This seems like such a minute detail, but you have to realize somebody made this logo, so there had to be some intentional thought put behind this decision. This feature on the logo also appears in the 8-bit Sonic 1 and 2, the Sega Sonic Bros. Arcade game, looking really strange at the top, in both versions of Sonic 3D, which would seemingly be the last appearance of this logo. I quite like this version of the logo, and I wish they had kept it somehow. There are also other oddities associated with it, though they don't really have any mysteries attached to them. In both the 8-bit and beta Sonic 2 logos, Sonic's hand is seen covering part of the text while seemingly not affecting the reflection in any way. and I'm going to ruin the Sonic 2 title screen a bit for you. There's this massive sunlight beaming against the logo, yet it doesn't seem to affect the reflection, which is exactly the same. And this beam of sunlight, including the light shining off of the characters, something that I've never liked as it makes the characters look plastic and is why the Sonic 1 and Sonic CD sprite is my favorite Sonic sprite, along with the Sonic text reflection, appears on the logo even when the background is completely black. Actually, it's quite odd logically how all of these reflections are the same in these three games despite taking place in different locations and the backgrounds moving. Maybe the logos and backgrounds exist in two completely different planes but are creating the illusion of occupying the same space. Or maybe I'm overthinking all of this. Alright, we're definitely below the iceberg, scraping the bottom of the barrel with this one. Before the player enters the stage Volcano Vault in the arcade game Sega Sonic the Hedgehog, a door can be seen with strange moon and star symbols at the top. This is strange enough, but the open doorway is actually an overlay as the actual dummied out door graphic contains a sun on it. What does this mean? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something and some of these entries piqued your interest, even if some of them were admittedly pretty silly. Also, I would love some answers to some of my questions if anyone has any. I really enjoy making these mystery videos, and so I figured why not do an iceberg on one franchise, even though there are only 13 entries and no tiers. Yeah, this isn't really an iceberg, I just wanted that vibe. If you want more like this, I already have a video that I talk about other obscure Sonic mysteries in, and I have more like this on the way. Also, I'm going to be reviewing every episode of Sonic X in the future. Someday, since I've already reviewed every episode of the Deke Sonic cartoons, so check that out if you're interested. Thank you to my patron, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.